On the beaches of Peru, a fisherman enters the sea with his boat and throws a net into the ocean to catch the school of fish that is passing nearby. However, when he tries to pull it back, the fisherman ends up being dragged into the water and dives in to try and retrieve his fishing net. When he reaches the bottom of the ocean, he is surrounded by the shoal and is terrified because he realizes that the fish are gathering to attack him. Meanwhile, on the Shetland Islands in Scotland, a biologist called Charlie calls her work colleague at the Institute of Marine Biology in Germany. During the conversation, Raheen reveals that his boss wants to map a specific area of the ocean with a piece of equipment called an AUV, and Charlie will need to stay in Scotland throughout the summer to do this work. After the call, the scientist receives an alert on her computer and discovers that the AUV has stopped working, so she gets on her boat and goes there to check what has happened. After putting on her wetsuit, the woman enters the water and retrieves her equipment, which was caught around the chain of a signal buoy. Upon returning to the surface, Charlie realizes that her boat has drifted away and swims quickly to catch up. On the beaches of Canada, Leon and his partner from the Vancouver Island Marine Institute are informed of the appearance of a perished orca found with numerous wounds scattered over its body. The animal body was carried by the tide until it ran aground on the beach, and, on analyzing it, the scientists came to the conclusion that those wounds were caused by human attacks. So Leon and Jack decide to investigate and go to talk to Kit. The fisherman tells them that the orca tried to attack them and did a lot of damage to his boat, so his men had no choice but to strike back to defend themselves. That afternoon, Charlie is visited by two colleagues from the Institute of Marine Biology for which she works. The pair went there to help her get the AUV working again, and, after completing the mission, Jess and Tomas left, leaving Charlie alone again. In the evening, the biologist decides to go to a bar and meets Douglas, a fisherman who immediately takes an interest in her. The man then starts asking Charlie questions about her work and they decide to spend a night together. The next morning, the scientist reveals that she needs to launch her equipment into the ocean, but Douglas knows that there is a storm approaching the island, so he decides to go with her. With the fisherman's help, Charlie throws the AUV into the sea, at which point Douglas spots a rock with a whitish substance floating in the water. After picking up the stone, the scientist explains that the flammable substance is called methane hydrate, which is released by lifeless algae that are buried at the bottom of the sea. Rarely, some pieces break off and float to the surface, but when Douglas looks around, he notices that there are several pieces like that floating near the boat, and Charlie decides to record the phenomenon. Later, she sends the footage to her colleagues to analyze, and her boss, Catherine, orders Charlie to investigate whether this phenomenon has also occurred in other areas. It's whale migration season in Canada, and Leon decides to go to the ocean to see them up close. When he's a few kilometers away from the coast, the young man puts a device in the ocean to listen to whale songs and is surprised by the arrival of a humpback whale, which suddenly approaches his boat. After facing him, the animal dives again, and Leon spots a group of orcas swimming towards a boat full of tourists. Concerned for their safety, the biologist tries to contact his friend, who owns the boat, but Lizzie is distracted by watching the humpback whale's acrobatics and doesn't answer. When they see the animal jumping out of the water, the tourists are fascinated. But suddenly the animal jumps on top of the boat and the vessel is broken in half. At that moment, everyone falls into the water and some end up being eliminated on impact. When he sees the orcas approaching the tourists, Leon contacts the Navy for help and throws a ladder down so that the survivors can get out of the water. Suddenly, the orcas approach from underwater and drag the tourists to the bottom. After helping a little girl onto the boat, Lizzie ends up becoming a victim of the attack, and Leon sees his friend being dragged to the bottom of the sea without being able to do anything to save her. On the beaches of France, after catching some fish and seafood living on a reef, the fishermen take them to the market, and the owner of Le Cinquid restaurant goes there to buy lobsters to serve to his customers. After cutting off the animals' heads, Bukion puts them in a pot of boiling water, but notices that one of the lobsters is releasing a white liquid from its abdomen. When he approaches to investigate what it is, the chef is hit by the substance that the lobster squirts in his face. He immediately wipes himself and asks Gilberto to get rid of the animal. While the sous chef wipes the liquid off the table, the trainee throws the lobster into the sink's food disposer and, before it perishes, the animal squirts the white liquid again, which hits Elena's apron. Hours later, the restaurant owner begins to feel unwell and asks Gilberto to finish the job while he goes out for a breather. However, when he arrived outside, Bukion fell to the ground and ended up being eliminated after expelling a large amount of black blood from his mouth. The next morning, Gilberto is hospitalized due to a high fever and acute diarrhea. The man was found in a coma, and the doctors don't know if they will be able to bring him back. In an attempt to find out what caused the illness, Cecile decides to go to Le Cinquid restaurant to ask the staff some questions, and a cook tells her what happened the night before. According to her, Bukion, Gilberto and Elena came into contact with a lobster contaminated with a white liquid. Curiously, the intern didn't show up at the restaurant that day, so Cecile decides to go to her house to check that Elena is okay. However, when she gets there, the doctor finds the woman lifeless. Just then, Cecile receives a call from her coworker and learns that Gilberto has perished after suffering a cardiac arrest. That day, Dr. Sigurd arrives by helicopter on Captain Jasper's ship, which is sailing the Norwegian Sea. Sigurd then meets up with Tina, his ex-girlfriend, and they both try to maintain their professionalism while investigating some images of the seabed captured by a submarine. Watching the recording, Sigurd comes to the conclusion that these creatures are actually ice worms that are feeding on the organic matter on the ocean floor. With the help of his team, the man managed to obtain a specimen of these worms and analyze the creature's morphology using a stereoscope. After capturing some images, Sigurd reveals to Tina that those ice worms have mutated, as they have much stronger teeth and jaws than usual. In addition, their reproduction is much faster than normal, and because of this, they have quickly been able to cover a gigantic area of the ocean floor. The next day, Sigurd and Tina take the images they have collected back to Germany, and Professor Catherine discovers that the ice worms are devouring the ice at the bottom of the sea at high speed, even though there is nothing there for them to feed on. By analyzing the destructive behavior of ice worms, the team also found a new species of bacteria, which reproduces much faster than any other species of microorganism. The images show that after the ice worms lose its life, the bacteria continue their work and devour the ice on the seabed, as if they were planning to get to the other side. After returning to the ship, the pair of scientists discover that the ice worms are even bigger, and, suddenly, a huge explosion occurs a few meters away from the vessel. When they investigate the cause of this phenomenon, the group discovers that when they used the drill on the ocean floor, they released a large amount of methane, causing the explosion. That evening, after sending a happy birthday card to her friend, Charlie spends the night in the bar drinking with Douglas. While recording a thank you video for her coworker, Jess senses a strange movement on the ship and a white spot forms in the water, causing the vessel to sink. In a small town in the Italian countryside, residents come across thousands of jellyfish scattered across the surface of the ocean, and everyone is curious to know what is going on. In the morning, while having coffee with Douglas, Charlie receives a call from Raheem and is informed that the Juno ship sank the night before. After receiving the news, Charlie goes to the Norwegian Navy's website and discovers that no survivors have been found. In an attempt to discover the cause of Gilberto's perishment, Cecile analyzes a sample of the patient's blood and discovers that he was contaminated by a bacterium that produces a toxin when it comes into contact with blood. However, the human body has sufficient defenses to eliminate this pathogen, so contamination is rarely fatal. The problem is that, after mutating, this bacterium has become capable of consuming blood at high speed and is quickly able to cause the perishment of its hosts. During the autopsy on the body of the orca that attacked the fisherman, Leon discovers a blockage in the brain lobe caused by a white goo, and Mir says he will do some tests to try and find out what it is. At that moment, a young man working at a car wash starts to feel ill and vomits a dark liquid on the windshield of a car. After vomiting, the employee falls to the ground and is taken to hospital. A few days after the incident in the restaurant, the whole city is contaminated by the bacteria, because when Elena threw the lobster down the sink, the microorganisms spread through the water supply system. In an attempt to find out what might be affecting the marine animals, Leon decides to go on a dive to install cameras on the bodies of some whales while they sleep. The animals are completely motionless as they float vertically, but when Leon starts installing the cameras, they all wake up and start moving. At this point, the biologist realizes that he is in danger and quickly swims to the surface. As soon as Leon gets on the boat, Jack starts it up and the trio manage to escape seconds before their boat sinks. After the perishment of her friend, Charlie travels to Germany and makes her first stop at Raheem's house. Together the scientists go to meet Professor Catherine, who shows them the recording of the wreckage of the ship. Suddenly, a luminous white mist begins to form around the boat and a group of whales approaches it. Through the images captured by the camera that Leon attached to the body of one of the whales, the biologist and his friends also witness the phenomenon of bioluminescence and are trying to understand what may have caused it. On one of South Africa's beaches, a couple are kissing when suddenly Lily is attacked by a crab. When she gets up, the young woman looks towards the ocean and sees thousands of crabs walking out of the water. Terrified, Mesuli pulls his girlfriend and they both try to flee far from the coast, but during their escape, the couple have a motorcycle accident and fall unconscious while the crustaceans spread throughout the city. It doesn't take long for the crabs to invade other beaches around the world, and, When she discovers that this has been happening in other countries, Cecile realizes that the disease that has spread to her town is just the tip of the iceberg. In an attempt to obtain new samples of the white substance expelled by the infected marine animals, Leon returns to the port of Vancouver, but the place is now considered a restricted area and is surrounded by security guards. After being barred at the door, the biologist turns around and leaves, but when night falls, he decides to break in and manages to climb over the gate. However, while walking around the site, Leon is spotted by the guards and ends up being captured. In the morning, the young man is visited by Clive Roberts and the elderly man says he won't press charges for the break-in. Instead, Clive takes the biologist to meet with Mr. Sato and Leon reveals the real reason he invaded the port. The businessman then promises to make sure he has all the samples he needs to carry out his experiments. After collecting a large quantity of infected mussels, Leon returns to the institute where he works to continue his research. After returning from her trip to Germany, Charlie receives a visit from Douglas and realizes that she is falling more and more in love with him. The next morning, when the fisherman leaves for work, Charlie listens to the message Jess recorded for her minutes before her ship sank and is moved to hear her friend's last words. Less than a week after the first crab attack, Cecile manages to gain access to some samples of the crabs and wears a special suit to avoid contamination while she analyzes the substance released by the crustacean's body. After placing a drop of blood together with the white liquid on a slide, the doctor verifies that it is the same bacterium found in the blood of patients infected by the lobster. When she analyzed the crab's anatomy, Cecile realized that this species is found exclusively in deep regions near hot springs. According to her, those crustaceans would not survive on the surface under normal conditions, which indicates that they too have undergone some kind of mutation. While analyzing Jess's footage, Charlie notices a very distinctive glow reflecting off the outside of the Juno ship and begins to suspect that the shipwreck may be related to the phenomenon of bioluminescence. After this discovery, the biologist sends the images to Rahim and asks her colleague to present the theory to Professor Catherine. Hours later, the woman arranges a meeting with Charlie and introduces her to Dr. Siger, who is also working on research into the phenomena that are affecting the behavior of sea creatures. After analyzing the wavelength of light and the frequency of sound in both pieces of footage, Charlie reveals her theory that this phenomenon is related to the shipwreck. However, Catherine doesn't believe there is a correlation between the two. When he gets home, Siger meets his ex-girlfriend and the woman reveals that she is leaving the country. Even though he knows Tina is in a new relationship, Siger says he can't imagine a life without her, but the woman just says goodbye and leaves. Later, Leon sends Siger the footage he collected with the camera attached to the humpback whale and the man realizes that the images show the same phenomenon identified by Charlie. So he immediately sends the video to Rahim and reveals his desire to go to the Shetland Islands to help the biologist with her research. The next day, Siger hitches a ride on a helicopter to reach the island and takes some gifts for Charlie, as she needs new equipment to complete her research. At that moment, Rahim is working in the lab and receives a tsunami alert on his cell phone. He immediately called Charlie to tell her the news, but the scientist left her phone at home while she accompanied Siger to the helicopter. Worried about his friend, Rahim decides to call Siger and inform him about the tsunami that is about to hit the Shetland Islands. Just then, Siger descends from the helicopter to pick up Charlie, who is just a few meters away. However, when she sees the sea receding, the biologist realizes that a tsunami is about to hit the island and runs to try to warn Douglas. Luckily, Siger manages to reach her and drags the scientist into the helicopter, knowing that she will be eliminated if she doesn't get out immediately. After they get on the helicopter, the pilot starts it up and the group manages to save themselves seconds before the tsunami hits the island. Meanwhile, Tina goes to the beach to meet her current boyfriend, as she plans to end a relationship before leaving the country. The man is working in a restaurant, so she decides to wait for him to get off work to have the conversation. While she waits, Tina takes the opportunity to feel the ocean breeze and suddenly notices that the sea is receding. When this happens, the woman immediately runs away from the beach and, when she sees Care getting into his vehicle, she screams for him, but her boyfriend decides to leave her behind. Minutes later, Tina finally arrives at her car, but realizes that she won't be able to get away in time, so she decides to spend her final minutes sending Siger a message, in which she says that she can't imagine a life without him either. After saying these words, the woman hangs up the call and watches the great wave approaching and sweeping away everything in its path. Upon arriving in Germany, Siger hears Tina's message and is shocked to discover that the woman he has loved most in his entire life is lifeless. That afternoon, Cecile gives an interview to the press conference to present the data found in her research about the bacteria that is being transmitted to humans through marine creatures. After watching the doctor's testimony, Sigurd contacts her to ask some questions about her theory, and Cecile reveals that she believes there is some superior intelligence behind all the attacks. At the end of the conversation, the scientists agree to meet the next day at the Institute of Marine Biology, and Leon is also invited to take part in the meeting. When everyone is reunited, Sigurd presents Cecile's theory and says he also believes that something beyond human comprehension is behind those attacks. The group is convinced that these phenomena could be some kind of response from the ocean to all the damage the human race has done to the planet, but Catherine refuses to believe any idea that isn't backed up by science. So the professor decides to leave the table and says she won't support her colleagues in this research, as she doesn't want to risk tarnishing her reputation as one of the country's greatest scientists. That night, while doing his research, Sigurd receives a visit from Leon and is intrigued by the symbol drawn on his bracelet. The young man then reveals that he got the accessory from his late mother when he was a child, and that the symbol drawn on it means unknown. Inspired by that symbol, Sigurd decides to draw it on a piece of paper and manages to decode the letters used to form it. In doing so, he finds the acronym YRR and decides to use it to name the mysterious creature that has taken control of the sea animals. During another press conference, Sigurd and his colleagues defended the idea that the being behind the attacks is even more intelligent than the human species, as it has shown itself capable of causing countless physiological changes in different animals and even creating new species through genetic mutation. After the interview, the group meets Samantha Crow, an astrophysicist who, after analyzing the sound picked up by Leon and Charlie, reveals that she has identified the same frequency coming from Antarctica and the Arctic Ocean. When he receives this information, Leon invites Samantha to join his group on an expedition in the ocean, and the woman accepts. That afternoon, Sigurd holds a meeting with Mr. Mifune and, with Sato's help, he gets the funding he needs to further his research. Right after the meeting, the man gathers his team to break the news and says that the plane will leave in 48 hours. Therefore, each member of that group will only have 2 days to say goodbye to their friends and family, as there is no guarantee that they will return alive from that mission. However, that evening, Rahim informs Charlie that he will be leaving the mission, as he has dedicated many years of his life to his work and now wants the chance to spend time with his family. After saying goodbye to their families, Sigurd and the other members of his group board Captain Jasper's ship. That day, Alicia also decides to join the mission to record all the information collected by the scientists and send it to Mr. Mifune's database at the end of each day. In this way, the team will ensure that all their efforts will not be in vain even if they perish, as the information they collect will serve as a basis for future research. The next morning, Charlie and Luther decide to test the submarine that will be used to collect samples from the ocean floor, and, as soon as they enter the water, the sonar detects the presence of a gigantic creature in the way, but the pair can't see anything. At that moment, communication between the ship and the submarine is cut off, so Charlie asks Luther to turn off the lights, as he believes there is something approaching them. However, the man decides to ignore her and starts the submarine to return to the ship. Just before boarding the vessel, the biologist spots a large luminous mist passing just below them, but the pair fortunately manage to reach the ship safely. During the dive, Charlie and Luther manage to pick up a sound signal that Samantha later begins to decipher. Hours later, while checking the submarine, Alicia notices a luminous substance emerging from the hangar pool, and suddenly the ship's lights begin to flicker. After a brief power failure, the crew manage to get the electricity back on, and Alicia is found passed out on the edge of the pool. The young woman is immediately taken to the infirmary, and Cecile does everything she can to try to bring her back, but Alicia remains unconscious. As time went by, numerous spots began to appear on her arms and legs, and the doctor said they could be blood clots. However, after analyzing the liquid she collected from her patient's bone marrow, Cecile found the same substance present in the bodies of animals infected with YRR. At this point, Charlie reveals that she saw a luminous white mass approaching the submarine just before it entered the ship, and begins to suspect that it has followed them. To ensure that no one else gets infected, the team decides to isolate the hangar, and Cecile continues to monitor Alicia's condition while Samantha tries to establish communication with YRR. Minutes after sending the first message, the woman receives a reply, and Charlie is surprised to see a strong glow emitting from inside the pool. At that moment, she notices that those organisms are capable of merging to take the form of marine animals, and so the theory of YRR being a creature with its own intelligence is confirmed. The next day, Mifune arrives at the ship by helicopter, and Sigurd shows him the images collected by the hangar camera. Scientists believe that the YRR is a unicellular organism that can fuse into a multicellular mass capable of assuming different forms. At this point, Samantha shows the image formed by the message received through sound frequencies and says that this relief represents the oceans that existed around the supercontinent 250 million years ago. With this image, YRR reveals to humans that it has a collective memory that is passed down from generation to generation through its DNA. Based on her observations, Charlie formulates a theory and reveals to her colleagues that YRR didn't infect Alicia with the intention of eliminating her, but rather to learn more about humans. While Leon and Samantha try to send a new message to the YRR with the aim of establishing peace between that being and humanity, Mr. Mifune reveals to Jasper that tsunamis continue to occur on various beaches around the planet and millions of people have become victims of the ocean's attacks. During her research, Cecile discovers a substance capable of eliminating YRR, and Mifune suggests that the scientists use ketamine to fight the organism, to see if this substance can be used as a weapon. The scientists decide to do an initial test, so Cecile and Luther put on their special suits and pour a small amount of ketamine into the pool. In doing so, they set off a huge sonic boom that destroys all the glass in the ship and causes a power outage. During the attack, Cecile faints, and when she wakes up, she sees Luther's body floating in the pool. She immediately tries to revive him, but is unsuccessful. At that moment, the captain realizes that his ship is moving towards an iceberg and is unable to avoid a collision. It doesn't take long for the crew to realize that YRR is in control of the ship and wants revenge for the attack that took place in the pool. In an attempt to make peace with that being, Sigurd suggests that Cecile injects the white substance into Luther's body, and then Charlie must take him to the bottom of the ocean via the submarine. That way, they will be giving YRR what he wants and can start a negotiation. Suddenly, the ship crashes into another iceberg and the crew rushes to put Sigurd's plan into action before it's too late. While Luther's body is being transported into the submarine, Cecile hands Charlie a syringe with white liquid and asks her to inject it into her colleague's body just before releasing it into the ocean. After entering the submarine, the biologist pilots through the darkness until she finally finds the luminous white cloud. However, instead of injecting the substance into her perished colleague's body, Charlie decides to use her own body as a guinea pig, in the hope of ensuring that the YRR understands her sacrifice as a peace treaty. The woman then opens the door so that seawater begins to enter the cabin, and, as Charlie drowns, the creature approaches to pick up her body, carrying it slowly across the ocean. In the midst of their grief, the captain and crew discover that their friend's sacrifice was not in vain, as YRR begins to move the ship away from the icebergs. Hours later, after having her body studied by the ancient creature, Charlie wakes up on a deserted beach, and, when he opens her eyes, a fluorescent glow is emitted through them. So what did you think of this series? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more series recaps. See you next time.